Our next presentation is Erin Phillips. That's one of the typos I got on her last name. I know her as Erin Tilius for years. And she is our homeopath that's going to be speaking today. And we're very excited to have her here all the way from Austin.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. As Sandra said, my name is Erin. I'm a homeopath. I work outside of my home in Georgetown, Texas, primarily via Zoom because, as many of you probably know, many of these kids have a really difficult time getting out of the house. So it just makes things easier for both the kids and the parents for me to see them via Zoom, and I love doing it. Anyway, I'm happy to chat with you today. So just by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with PANS Pandas? Okay, pretty much everybody. All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what PANS Pandas is, give you a very slight rundown for those of you who might not be familiar or who are just at the initial stages of diagnosis. I've met a few of you already today. I love the donkey the soundtrack in the background. It cracks me up. Okay, so pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric.
It's not working.
Of course. I'm blaming the donkey. Okay. Okay, so as many of you probably know, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections. That's a typical PANDAS diagnosis. And then PANS, pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome. Very similar, except, obviously the one has the streptococcal infection as the trigger, whereas PANS is a more general. For my own son, for example, onset was with Lyme disease. Let's see if I can find the cursor here. Okay. So symptomatology, as I'm sure many of you know, OCD, tics, ADHD, separation anxiety, mood changeability, separation, I already said that, emotional lability and sleep disturbances. Something that we saw a lot was changes in handwriting, issues with math, sudden regression in learning. Those kinds of things are very typical. Eating disorders, so that can be anything from, an onset of something like, something more severe like a bulimia or anorexia, and even something as simple as refusal to eat certain foods that they may have eaten previously. All of those things are very typical. Enuresis, so bedwetting or changes in bowel movements, changes in bladder control, anything like that. All of those are very typical. Anger and aggression, that was very prominent for my own child. So if your child was once sweet and angelic and then all of a sudden they, start to exhibit much more angry or aggressive behaviors, all of those types of things. Memory loss was very significant for us. And then chorea or seizure-like movements. I don't see that as much. I do see that in more progressive disease, but sometimes that can be something that we see. So as a mom, when I went to look for how to help my child, this was a little over 10 years ago, I went to the NIMH website and saw basically three options. So they were antibiotics prophylactically until the age of 18 to prevent him from getting any future infection, IVIG or plasmapheresis, which although they can be helpful, are very invasive. So that wasn't the first line of defense that I wanted to go. And then the third was the potential to hospitalize my child, which wasn't acceptable to me, not as a mom. So, which brought me to homeopathy. So what the heck is homeopathy? And those of you who may have heard me last year, I talked about this, but sorry, I'm having trouble seeing my slides here. Most people think of anything that is not conventional medicine is homeopathy. So the supplements, things like that. So some people think this is homeopathy. Other people think this is homeopathy. Or this. But actually, homeopathy is a unique system of medicine. It was developed by Samuel Hahnemann about 200 years ago. And it was based on the principle of like treats like. Much like, I don't know which speaker it was, but I overheard someone talking about Béchamp versus Pasteur. And Béchamp spoke about terrain theory, which is very much what homeopathy treats based upon. So we're treating like treats like. Many of the early U.S. hospitals were actually homeopathic hospitals, and there is a statue of Samuel Hahnemann in Washington, D.C. as one of the founding fathers of medicine. So homeopathy has a rich history, even here within the U.S. And it was actually nearly wiped out. Saw some renewed interest in the 1980s. A lot of this has to do with some of the things some of the speakers have talked about today, but essentially lots and lots of issues with the AMA and the Rockefellers and all those lovely people who like to squelch anything that they can't put their name on or patent or make a profit off of. So because we make all of our remedies from things found in nature, they couldn't ever patent or stop homeopathy from being made. And this is why there's been such a concerted effort to eliminate it, because essentially there's, like I said, if they can't, put a label on it and sell it, they don't want to market it. Interesting fact that homeopathy was also really effective during the Spanish flu epidemic, 90% effective rate. So pretty significant, I would say. And it is still utilized worldwide. They utilize homeopathy primarily in India. In India, homeopaths practice alongside all the allopathic physicians inside hospitals. There are homeopathy clinics all over the country. In the UK, there are homeopathic pharmacies, though those are dwindling as well due to all the regulations and things like that. But essentially, it is practiced throughout the world and quite successfully. And there are homeopaths, for example, in Africa right now who are treating the AIDS epidemic with very, very impressive results. So it's not just utilized for acute types of care. There's a lot going on with very severe illness. So why homeopathy? This is my son. He's 15 now. This was maybe 2 inches ago, I think. But why homeopathy? Well, this is why for me. This was my son at 4.5. He developed very severe case of PANS. Like I said, that was Lyme-induced. Pretty significant issues with anger and aggression, separation anxiety, wouldn't leave the house. You name it, we saw it. He was only eating bean burritos. He lived in a cardboard box in my living room for a while, those kinds of things. So significant, right? But why do I recommend that others use it? So homeopathy is not only effective, but it's inexpensive. So homeopathic remedies you can purchase at your local health food store for, $6 to $8. It's personalized, so every case that I take, I'm looking at the individual. I'm talking to the parent. I'm talking to the child. I'm taking an hour-long intake. We're talking about who your child is as a person, what they enjoy, the things they like to do, the things that make them uniquely them. So it's incredibly specific in a way that, any kind of allopathic medicine or one-size-fits-all approach is not going to get you. we've got hundreds of thousands of different remedies. So all of those remedies are taken into account when I'm looking at your child. It's also really easy to administer. So kids like it. They're little sugar pellets. So if you've ever, given your kid a couple of pellets of arnica or something called oscillococcinum, those you can find in your local health food store. A lot of people give those for bumps and bruises and things like that. Kids like it. They don't usually complain about taking it. But if they do, we also have ways around that. So you can put those pellets into some water, dissolve those pellets, and there's virtually no distinguishable difference in the taste. So, like I said, it's incredibly easy to administer, and probably one of the best ways to get to some of these kids that might have challenges with, ingesting things that, mom and dad made or things like that. So if they'll get a sip of water in them, you can get homeopathy in them. And then lastly, it doesn't interfere with other treatments. So I don't treat as a classical homeopath. So I've gotten this question a couple of times. In classical homeopathy, we say, only homeopathy. I don't treat that way because these kids are way too complex. There's way too many things going on. They've got toxicities. They've got, exposures to mold. They've got, metals. They've got vaccine injuries, all of these things. So to me, I don't want to take a kid off of something that's working for them. I want homeopathy to be a great addition. So, I always utilize what is working and then add in homeopathy on top of that. So a couple of case studies I wanted to go over. So I just wanted to show these pictures because they're pretty dramatic. So this is my son. The top, I guess that would be the top left for you, is him when he was about 3.5. And then there are a couple on the right-hand side of him during pandas when it was at its worst. You can see the dark circles under the eyes. You can see the expressions on his face, which are completely different from the, smiling, bright kid on the top left. And then another picture of him fairly recently. So that was not only the result of homeopathy. So I just want to make that really clear. We obviously utilized tons of homeopathy. It was the one major intervention that was huge for him. In fact, that's the intervention that got him out of the cardboard box. So he wasn't leaving my house, hadn't left the house for over a year, was in the cardboard box. I gave him homeopathy, and within hours, he decided he wanted to leave the house twice. So that was huge. That I attribute completely to homeopathy. But we were utilizing all kinds of other, functional medicine and things like that alongside. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. I don't want to give anybody false hope ever, but... All right, so these are a couple of cases that I've taken recently. This was a 5-year-old boy, panda's diagnosis, so very typical onset strep. Lots of anger, out of control, very rageful. Mom said he kept smacking his little sister. That was probably the biggest complaint for the parents, was that they had to keep the two separated because he kept hitting the little sister, who was only 2, I think. Enuresis, so wetting the bed, soaking the bed pretty much every night. OCD, lots and lots of unreasonable demands. She told me a story of how they were at a store and he decided he wanted this toy. And they literally could not leave the store until she bought the toy because he was so unreasonable and she was there with her other children. And unfortunately, that was the only thing that was going to stop him from, running away from her and knocking things down in the store and causing, a complete scene. So she was so humiliated, she ended up just buying the toy to get him out of the store. So I've been seeing him since September of 2022. And in that time, I just saw them, I think about a week ago. And she said, no more anger, doesn't hit his sister anymore at all. Is much more reasonable. So she doesn't have to buy the toy to leave the store. She can just tell him, no, I'm sorry. We'll talk about this at another time. And I've witnessed that just in their interactions, over Zoom. So that's been really, really awesome. And then another relief for mom especially is no more bedwetting. So she's not changing sheets every day. So that's a big relief. So this child, I think I've dosed, he's been on probably 3 different remedies at this point. So, nothing earth-shattering. We're not doing, tons and tons of treatment. Things are progressing, and it's a gentle progression. Sometimes with homeopathy, people don't even notice. And I said to her, well, what had changed since the last time? I said, I'm reading her back, all of her things. And she goes, oh, wait a minute. He hasn't hit his sister, at all. I said, well, that was, the number one thing you came to me for. So I think it's really good. It's really nice when you can remind parents, of where they were and how far their child has come, over the progression. So that was a fun thing to see. All right. All right, so this was an 8-year-old boy, autism diagnosis coinciding with Pan's diagnosis. This child was very gut affected, so lots of bloating, GI complaints. The mom said that he essentially had a belly all the time, like a beer belly constantly. And when the bloating would get really bad, he would get a lot of facial grimacing kinds of tics, and it became very obvious to his schoolmates, and they would make fun of him and bully him for those things. Lots of OCD fixations. He was one of those kids who really liked to fixate. I think it was on airplanes. But completely obsessed and fixated on airplanes, had all these models and things like that. But, and then a lot of food refusal. He was hardly eating anything that mom would prepare. It was really difficult to get him to sit down to a meal. With the family, he would want to have separate food prepared for him and only eat it by himself. So, that was another issue, creating difficulty in the family. And then quite a bit of anxiety. So after 8 weeks of treatment, again, we're talking about, those facial grimacing and tics. Those tics disappeared. Those were nearly gone. OCD was less frequent and also less intense. So even though there was still some OCD present after 8 weeks, it was less frequent and less intense both, which is a real win, I think. And then also gut health improvements. So the bloating went down significantly. He was no longer walking around with a big beer belly. He would occasionally get slightly bloated, but it would never get to the point where, it was a beer belly type of a complaint. He had regular bowel movements. All of those things were much more regulated. And then he also started to be much more adventurous with all of his food choices. So as the gut starts to improve, a lot of times what you'll see with all these kids is then they start to get more adventurous with their food. They're more willing to try new things. They're more willing to eat things that maybe they had eaten in the past that they, haven't been eaten recently. So that's a huge, huge change, obviously, as well. Okay. And then this one is a 14-year-old girl. She was a PANS diagnosis. This girl had very pronounced tics. They were they were difficult for her because she knew they were happening. And as a 14-year-old girl, you're in a very delicate state anyway. So these tics were all happening upwards, from the neck up. So clenching of the throat, snorting, gasping, making very strange noises, saying curse words, lots of, what people would think of as more Tourette's-like symptoms. Extremely difficult for her as well as for the mother. It was difficult in the school because she went to a Christian school and she was, cursing and things like that when she would tic. So that was creating a lot of challenge between the parents and the school and trying to manage this girl's care as well. She was very fearful of everything. And I mean everything. She would tiptoe around the house, everything, even just speaking with her over Zoom. She'd constantly be looking over her shoulder. She was constantly feeling like something was, out to get her. She was asking me during the Zoom, "Did you see that? Oh, I think my cat is peeing. Oh, every little thing would set her off. She was just very fearful, a fearful girl, which was sad, right? Because she's a 14-year-old girl. You want to see them be vibrant and growing and into adulthood and becoming who, the women that they're going to become. So a lot of OCD as well. Again, this was very prominent for her. Things that you would think of as typical OCD type behaviors. So her behaviors were, opening and closing doors, hand washing, those kinds of things that you would think of as very typical OCD type behaviors. And she completely lost her ability to draw. And that was her passion. She loved drawing. So that for her was the most important thing to get back. And I just kind of wanted to say a side note here, because a lot of times when people come and see me, the parents have one goal and the kids have another. And I think it's really important to recognize that when the kids have another goal, sometimes that's the most important thing to address, no matter how difficult that is for the parents to understand. Because when the kids see improvement on the thing that they need to improve on, then everything else starts to fall into place. So, this was a girl who loved drawing, who was passionate about drawing, but she was anxious and fearful of everything. And so getting her to a place where she was able to be more confident in her drawing skills made her more confident as a person. So that was huge. So we did do a lot of work with trying to regain her ability to draw. She was really sensitive to clothing, and she was having very intense panic attacks to the point where she would call her mom. She had an older sister. They would go out and do things together, but she would call her mom, and she would lock herself in a bathroom or something like that until her mom could come pick her up, because she was just having such a hard time. Okay, so this girl is actually still under treatment, but after 12 months of treatment, the tics, which were bothersome to everybody, including the daughter, were nearly gone. Now, like I said, you would think that a 14-year-old girl who was, having these horrible facial tics might say that those were the worst symptom for her, but they weren't. So again, I think it's so important to really recognize and understand your kid and know what the symptoms are that are truly affecting them. But obviously that was a good thing. So the tics were nearly gone. She was much more well-adjusted with her friends. She used to, I didn't even know this when I first took the case. And this is another thing that's really funny as a homeopath, when people come up to me and say, oh yeah, that thing I had, it's gone. And I'm like, wait, you never even told me that in the intake. So sometimes people will notice symptoms that, you didn't even know were there, have now resolved. So that was pretty neat. She had friends that she spent a lot of time with and didn't have panic attacks when she was with them. So that was really good. And then she showed me these pictures, and that's to me, the true, the proof that I had done something, I'd helped change a life was, she showed me these beautiful drawings of her anime. She likes to draw anime girls. And so she showed me, these beautiful drawings she had done. It was just truly amazing to see. I wish I had one of them, because I would show you, but they're beautiful. And then no more acute panic attacks. So obviously all of those things were tremendous to see. So those are just 3 cases that I wanted to share with you today. I know I don't have a whole lot of time. I don't even know what time it is or how long I've been speaking. But that's okay. But ultimately, I wanted to share why homeopathy and a case for homeopathy, using homeopathy first. So a lot of times, people say, oh, well, I've been utilizing, biomedical types of approaches. I've been utilizing ozone therapy. I've been utilizing hyperbaric oxygen or donkey milk or whatever, all of these different interventions, which are fantastic. And I would never discourage anybody from utilizing any of those. But homeopathy has a place in conjunction with all of these things. We can utilize it alongside all of these treatments. We can get results for these kids. We can help reduce inflammation. We can help get them to a place where they feel more comfortable in their own skin. And we can get them to a place where they're not so inflammatory. And by that, I mean inflammatory in both their brains and their behavior. So, I'm always pushing for people to try homeopathy and try it in conjunction with other things and see if it's something that might help your child. It helped mine, so that's why I'm here. All right, so that's pretty much all I have for today. I wanted to share those cases. I have a booth here right in the back, or a tent. I'm more than happy to chat with you. I'm also scheduling 15-minute consults. Those are free of charge. I'll do those over the phone. I know it can be a little bit hectic here, and you've got kids running around and all of that, so I'm happy to do those over the phone. There's no obligation. I also, in the booklet, am offering, because homeopathy is one of those things, it's not one and done. I like to see patients for a minimum of 6 months. I have included the second visit for free. So I want to make sure that you guys are coming back. So that's my gift to you guys this year, is I want to make sure that, should you choose to come see me, that I want to make sure that we follow up. I also have a podcast called the Autocommunity podcast. Sandra has been a guest on it. I've got lots of other autoimmune experts, people talking about all different things. So lots of the moms who come see me are experiencing things like Hashimoto's, interstitial cystitis, all kinds of lupus, immune issues. So I wanted to make sure that I gave something back to the moms as well, who are going through all of this. So that's where the podcast came to play. It's got lots of, like I said, lots of information on all different types of autoimmune disorders. And I think the donkeys are telling me it's time for me to leave. But I guess I feel like I'm like untethered here. I don't really know. but ultimately, if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to take a few questions, answer any of your questions now, or I'm just going to kind of stall until somebody else gives me the hook. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. No, you.
You said your son was 4 or 5 when it was a probable Lyme disease contraction, or do you suspect maybe, or what you're allowed to say?
So my son was 4.5. We were traveling in Florida. We were bit by mosquitoes, which there's quite a bit of research now on vector-borne illness and Lyme disease being in mosquitoes. So we were both eaten alive by mosquitoes. I had a typical Lyme bullseye rash and flu-like symptoms for several days afterwards. He did not have that, but he started with a burping tic within 24 hours. So we didn't put that together, though, initially. So that was further down the line when he and I both received a Lyme diagnosis. At that point is when we realized that that was onset for him. But I should mention too, he was never vaccinated. He was a home birth. So the toxicity on our planet, unfortunately, is so much so that we just can't control for any of those things. So, yeah. Anybody else? I guess I'm here until somebody else tells me. No questions. Everybody knows everything they ever wanted to know about homeopathy. Okay. Yeah, so with homeopathy, the remedies are incredibly specific, like I mentioned. So I'm looking at that child's different assaults. So did they have a vaccine injury? Did they have steroids? Like steroids are one of the number one suppressive medications that I see. So when I see a kid who's gone through bouts of steroids, that to me indicates that we need to uproot that steroids, because that'll suppress just about everything. So that's usually kind of the first place that I would start with a child who was more severely impacted. Ticks are unfortunately a lot of times ticks are the last thing to go. And in this, the case that I presented with the girl, that was a year of treatment until we were able to kind of resolve the ticks. But they did resolve, so that's the good news. But that one did take a little bit longer. But, she was also older, and she had been struggling for many years. Yeah. Sandra's here now, so. All right, I'm back in my tent for the rest of the day, and you're welcome to schedule. Like I said, I'm happy to schedule with you a 15-minute phone call, or we can chat here in the tent as well. Whatever works for you. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you to Sandra and the Trey Wicks. I love you guys.